What's your name, brother?
Hi, I'm Vinny Fernandez. So first of all, thank you. That was phenomenal. Beautifully done and presented.
Thank you.
My question is, what role do you see, if any, is the belief in evolution in all of this, versus a six-day creation?
Right. Yeah, good. So, yeah, obviously, so I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said that if Darwinism was the doctrine of the survival of the fittest, then eugenics was the doctrine of the survival of the nastiest. In a very Chestertonian way, right? Only he could put it that way. But he speaks to the very real connection between Darwinism and eugenics. And most of the eugenicists rather, of Sanger's day were Darwinists, okay? And many of them had actually been mentored by one of Charles Darwin's cousins, who was infamous for promulgating his ideas. And I just forgot his name. But Charles Darwin's cousin was actually more influential in the promulgation of Darwin's ideas than Darwin was himself. And many of Sanger's allies in the beginning of the real sexual revolution in many ways, and the abortion revolution, were devotees of the Darwinists. But it all makes sense from an ideological position, because if Darwinism is true, and what was the doctrine of Darwinism? The survival of the fittest. Well, why the survival of the fittest? Because there's no dignity intrinsically attached to the individual. We're basically just blobs of cosmic sludge banging around in the universe. And so the inevitable conclusion of that ideology is the animal kingdom. C.S. Lewis spoke to this as well when responding to the animal rights activists. C.S. Lewis made the point that if the animal rights activists succeeded in their agenda, it wouldn't further humanize animals, it would only further dehumanize man. Because if the animal deserves the same protection as the human being, it just means that we're no different than animals. And so inevitably, we're left with a world where the strong kill the weak and might makes right, which is one of the most fundamental phrases from the Darwinists. And so Sanger was a devoted Darwinist, as was Ernst Rudin, as was Lothrop Stoddard, as was Madison Grant, as was most of the population council eugenicists that she hobnobbed around with. And so I would say that one of the most dangerous threats that has ever existed to the Christian worldview and the survival of a republic is Darwinism. And it shows itself in many forms. We today might call it secular humanism, which is just based on this Darwinistic idea. But isn't it interesting that secular progressives still have this obsession with rights? Isn't that interesting? I mean, how do you defend that? You're a Darwinist. You don't believe that there's a God, and therefore you don't believe that therefore you don't believe that there's any dignity attached to the individual. So why are you so obsessed with these ideas of rights? And a lot of historians have written about this, but I think it goes back to Christ. Right? Christianity was so revolutionary in this this focus on the victim, this love for the oppressed. As we said before, right? America is the exception, not the norm. Well, that type of worldview was the exception and not the norm. Do you guys know why the early church became so ethnically diverse? Because they were rescuing all the infants that the Romans left out for exposure. Infanticide was a normal practice in Rome and throughout the time of the early church. And the church fathers would write about this, about people who would literally say, if it's a girl, leave it out. Leave it out. They called it exposure. So you had all these ethnically diverse Christians because they were rescuing the babies and raising them as their own. Because of what? The imago Dei, the dignity of the individual. And so that became the exception. But because of how revolutionary Christianity was throughout the Western world and throughout the world, you have people who forget the source of those rights, but still have what Scripture calls this eternity written on the heart of man. And so they still identify with the cause of the oppressed. They got that from Christianity, folks. But they can't provide a philosophical or ideological reason as to why, if they're a Darwinist. which once again should give us a little bit of hope left for this republic, that people are not the enemy, they're the opportunity. And if they have a burdened cause for the heart of the oppressed, we should remind them of who is truly oppressed and who could be more oppressed than unborn children in our midst. Thank you, brother. Yeah.